This is That Marketing Podcast.
Made by marketers, for marketers.
Welcome to another edition of That Marketing Podcast, brought to you by Spotlight UK. My guest today is Stephanie Scheller, founder of Grow Disrupt, which provides support and training for small businesses in America, particularly focused on sales and marketing. Today on the podcast, we discuss how she evolved the brand from Scheller Enterprises into Grow Disrupt, and how that compares to the way that Communicator transitioned into Spotler at the beginning of 2020. We cover good and bad reasons to change your brand, key considerations around timing, and how a simple press release can be a very powerful tool for managing the transition. I hope you enjoy.
So rebranding wise, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because Spotler have just sort of emerged from the other side of the process, becoming Spotler after being Communicator. So your sort of on this is rebranding, Grow Disrupt.
Grow Disrupt.
Yeah. Obviously, your experience is rebranding your Grow Disrupt conference on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I thought the way I want to start was ours was a top-down rebrand for people who don't really know the Spotler story. We were initially called Communicator, acquired by Spotler, I think June 2018, and then the end of 2019 was the point we said, right, it's now the time to bring the two brands together. So ours was sort of a top-down rebrand, whereas yours is from a sort of keeping the content fresh point of view. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how that affects how we got them.
Well, so it does. We also did, actually roughly the same time frame, which is kind of funny. Ours was at the end of 2018. We went through and we rebranded the entire company top down, very similar to what you guys had to do. And so it became something that we became very familiar with very quickly. And then when I reached out to a company to develop a new brand for our annual retreat, the Grow Retreat, and they developed this gorgeous brand, but it was very specific to the theme that we had for that year. And I realized, after I got the brand back, I didn't specify that I wanted a brand that could stand. What do I do? And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, this is actually really great because we get the same people coming back every year and we don't want it to start to feel stale for them. So if we rebrand it every year, we keep some hallmarks the same, but we design a new brand every year. It will keep it feeling really fresh. And so we had to learn very quickly how to balance that side of rebranding, but not losing the essence of the brand itself, redesigning, but not losing the actual brand. And it was it's been a lot of fun to go through. It's been a lot of growing, but I think it's actually really helped us grow. It's certainly brought its own challenges, but I think it's helped us grow quite a bit.
Sure, I definitely want to pick up on that. That was the first thing that our team sort of came up with, and our marketing director said, this is the day we do it, or this is the time frame for the rebrand. He said, how do we maintain the sort of the brand awareness and also the essence of the brand while keeping it fresh? So can you tell us a little bit more about how you walk that tightrope of keeping it fresh but not still sort of familiar, as it were?
Yeah. So that really comes down to understanding what are the core tenets of the brand. And we had to go way beyond. We did a ton of client interviews and asking questions and trying to understand what was it about our brand? What was it that people loved on a subconscious level, right? So we had to sit here and come up with really, really clever questions that would allow us to get our prospect to tell us a story and to tell us about what it was that drew them to the brand beyond the colors and the logo and the design, but what was the core of the brand, right? So we had to look into what are the characteristics. What is it we bring to the table that people really love? And it's the accessibility and the exclusivity that of like, for example, the Grow Retreat, which is the one we rebrand every year, right? So when people started, they said, I love the fact that I walk into a room full of people I don't know, but I instantly feel at home. And we said, okay, that's good to know. So what are they actually telling us? It's that community. They really love that. Okay, well that's a piece of the brand. So what else? So we asked them, what would you, if you had to describe this event to someone else, what would you say? Right. And so we get all these different answers back. And again, we do the same thing. Okay, so what are they actually telling us. And then so once we kind of figured out, okay, this is and we created like a 3-page document on what is the core tenet of the brand. And so every year when we go to rebrand and rebuild, we look at those core tenets and say, okay, so how do we show this through the design, through the artwork, through the colors that we choose? How do we still relate this to that core of what makes the brand work? And in a more practical sense, we use the same font. We have a couple of shapes that we use pretty consistently. So we use a hexagon.
Obviously, it's a slightly different experience with ours. Is Touchwood is going to be a sort of one-off brand that's brought in. We've become part of this family, whereas yours is an annual thing. How do you sort of set a time frame for this? How do you balance the need to do it sort of efficiently with being thorough?
Well, so the good news is, because we're redoing this every year, we don't have to recreate that brand document every year. We had to work really hard to create that the first year, but we don't have to recreate that every year. So really, actually, we've been moving it earlier and earlier. Last year, we didn't end up doing the rebrand till like July for the January event. This year, we actually started the rebrand in February for the 2021 event. And for the 2021 event, we're actually going to start the rebrand for the 2022 event in November of this year. So we're actually getting further and further in advance, so that because what it allows us to do, because the thing with a new brand, right, is you need to be able to open it in a splash, right, in a way that tells people, hey, this is the new brand, in a way that gets a lot of people's attention, so that they're paying attention. So when they see the new brand again, yes, you can use the same shapes, the hexagon, the fonts, you can use a lot of the same concepts with the brand, so there will be some feeling of familiarity there. But really, the best way to do it, to launch a new brand, is to do it with a big splash. And when we were looking at this, what's the best way to launch the new brand with a splash? We're like, well, doing it at the previous year's retreat would really be, the best way to do it. So we're actually going to have this moment at the very end. I'm giving away a little bit of what we're planning here, but we're going to have this moment at the very end of the 2021 retreat where we unveil the theme for 2022 and the new brand, and all of the colors. We have colored lights all around the room, and all of the colors on the lights will change from the old branding colors to the new branding colors. So it'll be a very big splash. We'll launch the new website right then and there. I mean, it's going to be a very big deal. And then I think the key is relating it to something consistent, right? So we aren't rebranding the Grow Disrupt brand. We aren't changing all of that. And even when we rebranded Grow Disrupt, we kept the Stephanie Scheller brand consistent. And so we tied that to the Stephanie Scheller brand as kind of the bridge between the two. And I think that's really important if you want to get the most leverage out of your rebrand.
One of the things particularly that took us by surprise when we were looking at the work that we didn't actually see coming was rebranding on LinkedIn. We found out it requires a full-on press release. You have to write something up, submit it to them. I mean, we were changing our logo and our company name as well. So maybe that's maybe not something that comes up for your event-wise. You would really need that.
Now, you guys had to send a press release to LinkedIn?
Yeah, we had to submit to our marketing director, actually the admin of the page. So he was kind of handling the social media rebrands. We sort of made the images and came up with a sort of a splash of content to launch with. But actually get changed from community to Spotlight, I think it's actually at the time of recording still ongoing when we did it nearly a month ago. So if anyone listens to this with tips for getting a rebrand, that's one. If you're on LinkedIn, definitely think about that.
It'll take a little while to get that. So we do roll out a press release for the new rebrand every year. And I do think that's really valuable. That was something we didn't do when we rebranded from Scheller Enterprises to Grow Disrupt. And it's something I wish we had done. It's just a press release, just putting it out there. And the beautiful thing is, if you do a press release, even if it doesn't get picked up by a whole ton of platforms, you can still put it out there and you still talk about, hey, our press release, and your network will still pay attention to it. There is something really powerful about the words press release. And so you can still get a lot of traction just from the words press release, like right there, you get a lot of attention and it draws the name to, oh, this is something worth paying attention to. Because that's the big thing, I know, one of the things we talked about is how do you not throw away the reputation that your existing brand has built? And that, it really is all about getting enough attention so that people know that the rebrand is happening, and then doing it in a natural way so that it still feels familiar when people see the new brand. So you're still playing on the, synapses and connections and memories that people have already built with your current brand, for the new brand.
Yeah, maybe this is more to your point about rebranding from Scheller Enterprises to Grow Disrupt.
Mm-hmm.
But you're starting to reach a slightly different target audience and a wider audience. So what we found quite interesting was trying to balance, I suppose, the voice of the brand. Especially for us, the interesting thing was that Spotler, our parent company, have their own distinct voice, and Communicate had its own distinct voice.
Yeah.
And trying to sort of marry the two. I suppose marry is the perfect word, because they're not becoming the same, but they're sort of joining, combining in a slightly different way. I just wonder how you went about keeping that tone, but also pivoting to the new audience that you're trying to reach with your rebrand.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because we did not have to rebrand our voice because it was the same voice. So now I'm sitting here going, ooh, how would we deal with that? But I think it's a good point, because that's something I think a lot of people forget is part of your brand is the voice. And so to be able to say, hey, this is the new voice, you want to have some carryover. So this is where you might take some time to identify what are the core tenets of the new voice versus the old voice. Are there some ways we can show the two coming together? And is there some value in potentially keeping some of the voice from the previous brand? Like, is there any value to that? And bringing that, maybe your previous brand joked around and had kind of a more of a comedic effect, right? You may say, well, is there some value in bringing some of that comedy voice, some of that jokester voice into the new brand, their voice? Do we want to retain some of that? Did it work for the previous brand? Does it make sense to say, hey, we're bringing this new company on board and we're rebranding them to join us. And what we've loved about them is that they are, they're smart and thoughtful, but they're hilarious. And we look forward to bringing the same to you. And so I would do, kind of the same thing I talked about earlier, identify what are the core tenets, and then either say, okay, here's how we're going to transition them, or here's what we are going to keep in order to make the two brands a little bit more cohesive.
Yeah, it's really, really clear from this that a deep understanding of the brand is critical. How did that play into your decision to reach out for a company to help with the rebrand initially? Was it something you tried to do yourself and then said, hang on, we need this, or was the company your first port of call?
No, we tried to do it on our own at first, and I just realized it was a, what's the saying, forest for the trees situation. I could not see beyond the day to day into what was it that was really making the brand work. And I wasn't familiar enough with running stuff like, like the client interviews. We did feedback forms all the time, but I'd never tried to take those. So everyone who goes to our retreat, they get a form to fill out after the retreat to say, hey, what did you think? And getting feedback. But we never thought to take that into the level of how do we figure out what it is people love and why this is working so well. It wasn't until I sat down with the branding company, because we did try and do it ourselves, and I realized I'm too close to the situation. I'm trying to rebrand it one way, but I'm not doing a good job, because for small business, a lot of small business owners, we operate from a very emotional place about our business. Our small business is our life. It's our everything, right? And so when we operate from this place that is very emotional, it is hard for us to get those emotions to come out as words on our own. We often need help with that, with communicating that well. And so I realized I wasn't doing a good job communicating it, because for about a year I was trying to rebrand it, but it wasn't really catching on. And so that was when I reached out to a company, or actually a company reached out to me and said, hey, you have phenomenal stuff and we really love this and this and this. And, we went to your events and we would love to do your rebrand. would you be open to that? And of course I was like, yes, because I'm realizing I cannot do this myself. But they were the ones who really pulled a lot of that information out of my head in a way that made it useful. So I think it's really helpful to bring in another company. I really do.
Yeah, it's interesting using customers as a sounding board to understand what they like as the brand. I really like that as an actionable takeaway if you're thinking of going through a brand, to understand what your customers like about you, or potentially dislike, I suppose, is the other way of saying
Yeah.
it. If you could change something about the company, the brand, what would you change? Yeah, the other thing I picked on, I think the emotional connection, I absolutely understand it for small businesses, but I think for the SME space, which is where we are, I would come back and say that's absolutely the case in there. I think the culture was very strong. I think it doesn't sound terribly cool to put it out there, but we sort of called ourselves Gators when we were a communicator, and we haven't got a replacement name for colleagues that we sort of use internally. So I see what you mean about the brand having roots kind of internally and externally as well. There is an attachment to the way of doing things.
There is. And I think it's really valuable to bring in that outside, even for the larger companies. Like for the larger companies, first of all, the likelihood that they're going to be able to, I mean, they could probably afford to hire someone full time to do the rebrand, someone who's really talented, but at the same time, they're it doesn't make sense to hire someone to do it like full time to do a rebrand. Like it just doesn't. You're not going to you're going to spend a lot of money, whereas you could spend a decent amount of money, but not a ridiculous amount of money to hire a firm to do your rebrand, and they'll have that outside perspective. And I just think there's a lot more. I think it's a lot more. I think it's just a smarter way of doing it. I don't think rebranding is something you do in house, even if you are a branding company, because again, you're just too close to it most of the time.
Interesting. So we ran it entirely by our own, or it was run entirely by our own marketing team. And my sort of counter argument to that would be that who better understands how to communicate with your customers and with your leads and the people that you're hoping to reach in this new format than the people whose full-time job that is.
Well, so with you guys, you had an existing brand that you were incorporating into. It's not like you guys were building it from scratch, right?
That's true. Yeah.
The Spotler brand already existed. So you were rebranding Communicator into Spotler, but it's not like you were building a brand from scratch. So I think that would be the distinction there for me, would be that it's very challenging to build a new brand from scratch internally, I think, in my experience. Whereas with you guys, where you were incorporating one brand into the other, you're not designing the whole new brand from scratch. I think that would make more sense to do internally.
That's a fair point. I'll take your point on that particularly. Now I've sort of been through the mechanics of how we've each done it. You've seen other people sort of go through rebrands. Do you think there's a sort of a range of good and bad reasons that people go through rebrands? I imagine, my theory, I can't prove this particularly, but there is that linked with the LinkedIn sort of extra layer of work that you might conceivably rebrand to shed a bad corporate reputation. Obviously, that's not a great reason to do it. I just wonder if you've got any others that you'd put up there as terrible reasons to make these big changes.
Rebranding is really quite the exercise to go through. It is quite a bit of work. I don't know that there is bad reasons to have to go through. And I mean, really, if you're having to rebrand to get away from a bad company reputation, you really need to weigh that very carefully, because a rebrand is extremely expensive in time and energy and money. And if you are you're gonna have your reputation has to be completely destroyed to make it worth going through a rebrand versus just going through a PR campaign to improve your reputation, because rebranding is so extensive. So I feel like that is probably a terrible reason to go through a rebranding exercise, on top of the fact that if your reputation is terrible, that really isn't fun at all. But I really can't think of a whole ton of like bad reasons. But the opposite side of that, what are the good reasons to go through a rebrand? If you're in the midst of a growth period and your business is growing and outgrowing the previous brand, that's a great reason to have to go through a rebrand exercise, where you're saying, hey, you know what, this brand worked for where we were at, but it's too limiting now. We need to spread our wings a little more. And I think that those are probably the most exciting reasons to go through a rebrand exercise.
In terms of going from Scheller to Grow Disrupt, one of the things we keep sort of coming across is using older reviews and older sort of case study and other material references us as communicator rather than spottler.
Mm.
Do you think it's important to rebrand those, or do you think having that sort of sense of history is fine? My sort of worry with things like that is if a new company discovers that resource and say, oh, are they spottler, are they communicator, and mixed messages are the very last thing you want as a marketer to be putting out there.
Sure. So, I would go through and update those, but I would update it in a way that referenced this was written as communicator. Back in 2014, we rebranded. You might put like a little an author's note at the beginning. And so then you update it to, communicator, or spottler, you might do a parentheses communicator. But I would update it, but I would make sure I wouldn't try and erase the history of being communicator, right? So you still want to say, hey, this was who we were and we did great and we're really proud to join the spottler. And then you could reference back to, the press release that you put out about the transition from communicator to spottler. And so you write an article, that, or let's say you've got an old article that you wrote back in, I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago as communicator. And you're like, oh, we need to update this. So you put a little note that says this article was written, at a time when communicator was, or spottler was two separate companies. Communicator, we merged into spottler back in 2020 or 2019, and here's the press release to kind of walk you through what we did. And so then you reference people back to the press release so you don't lose that history, but at the same time you also don't create confusion.
Right, yes, I think that's what we ended up doing with a lot of our certainly the SEO snippets on our website. We sort of brand them as spottler parentheses communicator, so we've got that continuity there. One of the debates we had was actually, does the confusion sort of leave you shedding the brand completely, or is it better to plunge ahead? And I think that's a good answer to that, to sort of acknowledge the sense of history, but to go all in on the new brand so people can have that big splash impact.
Yeah, and one thing you can do is keep track of everywhere where the old brand is referenced, and in another year or 2 years, you remove it. Like we left the Scheller Enterprises site up, we rebranded to Grow Disrupt. We left the new site up for a couple of months, and then we started we put a note on there that said this, we've been rebranded, go here. And then I think after 6 months, we started forwarding. We took the site down and we forwarded everything. We set up forwarding links, right? And we forwarded everything to the corresponding Grow Disrupt, and we, for about another 6 months, we referenced this Scheller Enterprises rebrand, but then we took it all off and we just we're just Grow Disrupt now. But it was a process. It wasn't like there's no flipping a switch, I think, because you don't want to lose that brand, that brand, I'm blanking on the word, but the
brand equity, I think, is probably the
equity. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. We did the same with our social media handles, actually, sort of Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'd say LinkedIn is a bit more of a complicated process, so we've left that alone, but we still held on to the @communicator handles, so we are able to revisit them and get back to them if necessary. We haven't talked about how long to keep them for, but I agree. I think there's a process where you can keep moving through the rebrand. You get your website and everything properly rebranded, and then tidy up the legacy bits.
Yeah. And you can put together a 6-month process where you're posting once a week on the communicator, handles saying, hey, we are now spottler. In order to keep getting the same great content, join us over here. Hey, by the way, here's a really cool post we made over on spottler that you should go check out and follow us over there, and do that for a year or so. And then, and then phase it out and shut it down so that you do eliminate some of that confusion. But doing it over time and being consistent. If you're going to keep them, right, don't just keep them and leave them empty. Keep them and update them to say, hey, because communicator didn't disappear. And that's the key with rebranding. Your old brand didn't disappear. It got embraced by this other brand and is not as visible anymore. But if people are looking for communicator, you still want them to see, hey, this has been updated, a handful of times here. You don't need to be updating it daily. You probably don't even need to be updating it weekly, honestly. I kind of, that's probably a little bit too aggressive, but some updates to try and transition that following to the new platform. I think that is important.
Yeah, I suppose one thing to keep sight of, especially in a takeover situation like ours was, is that the acquiring company, Spottler, in our case, they visited us. They came and met with us. They came to the office. They, in fact, actually brought their entire company over for a pub quiz and meal with all of our staff.
Nice.
see the culture match up. So it's worth remembering that they must have seen something that you liked in the brand, not just in the technical capabilities, because otherwise they wouldn't particularly have gone for the acquisitions. That is a reason to keep that brand history and keep some of those distinctive elements that make you what you were originally, that got you to the point where someone said, oh, we want to bring these guys into our orbit.
Yeah, agreed.
Do you think there are significant other pitfalls that anyone who's sort of considering a rebrand for good reasons needs to be aware of, or do you think we've mostly covered the things to watch out for?
I mean, I think the biggest thing if you're going to be going through a rebrand is you don't jump into it willy-nilly. This is not something where all of a sudden one day you wake up and go, you know what, we're rebranding. Come on, y'all. Like, let's go it doesn't work. Like, this is something that needs to be done with a lot of forethought, a lot of strategy. You need to look at what are we keeping, what are we getting rid of, how are we going to transition our audience, how are we going to use the brand equity we've already built, the relationships we've already built to catapult the new brand forward, because that's what it really needs to do. If you're bringing two brands together and you're going to get rid of one, I don't know if this is super common knowledge, but Sprint and T-Mobile are two major phone carriers here in the US, and they've been acquired. So Sprint was acquired by T-Mobile, and they are still, this was like 2 or 3 years ago. They are still, no, I guess it was 2 years ago, but still, they're still working on that rebrand, and if you look, Sprint is still out there trying to recruit clients. It's still operating as a separate company while they figure out how are we going to do this merger and bring the two companies under one roof. It's not something to be done overnight. You want to do it in a way, because if they do this right, it's always, again, here in the US, it's always been, AT&T and Verizon at the top of the dog pile, and then Sprint and T-Mobile have kind of been working their way up from the bottom. And if they do this right, what they should be able to do is catapult the remaining brand up to the level or higher than the other two brands, right? That's the whole purpose of bringing the two brands together. And so being smart about it, saying, okay, what assets do we have? What do we need to keep? What do we need to get rid of? What do our clients say they don't like that we want? This is a great opportunity to say, okay, we're doing away with that. That's the big key, and not to rush it. That was one of the mistakes we made when we rebranded was we started the rebrand process in like February of that year, and by the time we got to July, I was like chomping at the bit. I was like, let's go. And so we pushed and we hurried to get the rest of the rebrand out, and I wish we had taken a little bit more time to really plan the transition of all of our marketing assets over, instead of kind of flying by the seat of our pants, and really embrace what was working, what wasn't, and be a lot more clear with people about why we were doing the transition and how this was a better fit for them and how they were going to love it more, and not just hey, we're changing the brand type of thing like what we did.
Great, really. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and helping us sort of bounce off each other in two different sort of styles of rebrand. If people want to hear more from you, you've got your own podcast, Black Belt Selling. Where can people find that if they want to listen to a bit more of your thoughts on all things sales?
We actually have that. If you go to our website, growdisrupt.com, you can get to our podcasts on there. I think under resources is where it's listed. We also have a ridiculous number of free courses. Really, I mean, we have some very cheap courses, but there's some good free stuff up there. We have a crazy amount of articles. We have links to our podcast. We have a really cool quiz that, we designed to help small business owners figure out, what do I need to fix next in my, what should I focus on first? There's everything needs to be fixed in the business. What do I focus on first? So it's just a great resource site and the best way to find our podcast or articles, or get in touch with me if they have questions or any of that good stuff.
Cool. Okay. Well, the final thing we sort of aim for on the podcast is having an actionable takeaway that someone can go straight away and do. And I'm going to suggest that the one from this is to take the time to really think about what is the voice of your brand, what do people like about it and dislike about it, and yeah. I think a valuable takeaway, whether or not you're planning a rebrand, that if you're planning a new marketing campaign or a new set of sales outreach, then it's really going to help you almost beyond a rebrand. So hopefully that's something people can take away whether they were listening to this for direct advice or for sort of broad thoughts and for it to be a little bit more theoretical, if you like.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, and it really, the only thing I would add to that is document it. Get it in writing. It allows you so much freedom with your marketing, so much scalability, so much room to grow if you document, it really is a phenomenal exercise. It takes some time. Talk to your clients, ask them what they love about your industry, ask them what they hate, or ask them what they love about working with you, ask them what they hate about your industry. Never ask your clients what they hate about working with you, because they're never going to say it. They're going to be like, oh, nothing, I love you. But if you ask them, what do you hate about my industry, you can find out, oh, hey, we're doing that thing that they said they don't like. Cool, we should fix that. But get to know that information, document it, and it's a really powerful tool to have. It allows you to lean on other people for support. It allows you to have brand guidelines to check yourself against. Every document, I've got a friend who does some marketing designs for Coca-Cola. And he said, Stephanie, everything we create for them, we send over, and it goes through 3 levels of quality control. That's how Coca-Cola has built a billion-dollar brand. So, that would be my takeaway, is document it so you can have that same level of quality control and that same value in your brand.
Absolutely. I think we found that last time we brought new people onto the team and we asked them to start writing blogs for us, that having to explain what the voice of the blog was actually quite a challenge. So then when we came to the rebrand, having done that work was super valuable. So it works internally as well as externally, even if it's your own brand, or like you say, if it's sort of an agency situation where you're trying to understand a client brand, then having that knowledge documented, I think that's a really good takeaway. So people listening to this, document what your brand voice is, work it out, write it out, and make sure everybody knows it. That's perfect. I'll leave that there.
Spot on.
Excellent. Stephanie, thank you so much again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of That Marketing Podcast. You clearly have wonderful taste. We hope you found the content useful and enjoyed it. We'd love you to subscribe wherever it is you're listening to us. Maybe leave us a review. If you can think of a topic that you'd like us to cover, or even if you fancy coming on the podcast and sharing your own experience on a particular topic, you can reach us at marketingteam@spotler.co.uk. Thanks once again, and happy marketing.